Bioeconomy Summit. I hope that you've enjoyed the day. I've enjoyed the day. This has been the biggest event that SynBioBeta has ever done and the most stress-free event that we've ever done. Apart from 10 minutes ago, would you believe that there was a power cut in my home, and I thought that Kevin might be having to do this interview next, but we pulled through. So a little stress most recently. I hope that you enjoyed the breakout sessions that we just had. We've seen a lot of comments and ideas coming up. We had 33 breakout sessions in the last 4 hours, so a huge amount of effort going in, and we look forward to seeing all of these exciting ideas. To end today, we have a very special guest. Eleni Kounalakis serves as the 50th Lieutenant Governor of California. She was elected to that position in 2019. She's the first woman elected to this office, and she's also a former diplomat. Eleni Kounalakis, welcome to the Built with Biology Summit.
Thank you so much for having me, John. It's great to see you again.
It's great to see you too. The last time we were with each other was on a trade mission from the Bay Area to India, of all places. And we were just reminiscing that we were probably the last flight to be let back in the country before COVID lockdown.
Like a million years ago, and it was just a few months back. But, well, we need to get those flights up and running again, hopefully sooner rather than later.
I know that you're on the governor's task force for reopening the economy. Can you give us some insights into how that's going, and what are some of the big ideas that are coming across your desk?
Sure. Well, I think the first thing I'd just like to say for everyone out there who's dealing with this new normal in their own way is that what we accomplished in California really is quite extraordinary. We saw the future as we looked at what was happening in New York and in the UK, in Italy. And we are a science-based state. Our leadership listens to the scientists. The scientists were very clear early on that we had to do something quickly. So California became the first state in the country to issue the stay-at-home order. That has clearly made a big difference. So if you look at the fatalities in California, around 4,000, and every one of them a terrible, terrible tragedy. But 4,000 in a state of 40 million people. New York, for instance, has half the population and has over 30,000 fatalities. So we know not just the government action, but frankly, the fact that Californians have enough faith in government to adhere to the stay-at-home order and to take those necessary precautions and educate themselves. Together, we didn't just flatten the curve in the state of California, we crushed it and saved a lot of lives.
Absolutely. And you're definitely preaching to the choir here. A lot of biological scientists on the line, a lot of PhDs who've been coming up with some great ideas. I want to shift the topic to innovation, and particularly the role that innovation plays in economic growth. We're seeing right now a lot of disparity is ripping at the seams here. What do you think is the key role that investment and innovation can play in recreating economies, specifically ones that are built with biology, but also having this opportunity to recreate an economy that works for everybody and not just a few?
Well, you mentioned the task force that the governor put together, and I'm very honored to be a member of it. It is a very large task force, almost 100 people, but some of the most extraordinary Californians that you will find, or people representing companies that have big presences in California. So we go on those Zoom calls with the governor's task force, and there's Tim Cook and Janet Yellen and Priscilla Chan. I mean, just some incredible people who have said, look, we understand that the recovery is going to be very difficult, that families and companies and programs are going to suffer. We want to be able to be part of the solution. So it's been incredible. The task force is divided into subgroups in order for people to work together more efficiently. A lot of really good things have come out of it. It's not intended to write reports or to issue studies. The task force is there to offer real-time advice. The CEO of Chipotle is on it, and they have given feedback not just in how a Chipotle can reopen, but how can restaurants in general reopen. So the Restaurant Association is on the task force, but individuals within, representing. The list goes on, and it really is something, but it's very much about providing expertise in real time. But I think that when you talk more broadly about the situation in California and what recovery is going to look like, I think that it's helpful to remember the qualities and the realities here in California that allowed us to become the fifth largest economy in the world, because most of these things haven't changed, and we hope won't be affected. So, for instance, we have the University of California and the CSU. These two public education systems alone represent 33 campuses and almost 800,000 students. Our community colleges, another 2.1 million students. So we're talking about almost 3 million students enrolled in public higher education in the state of California. And again, the CSU, the UC, these are among the greatest university systems in the world. So not only do we produce a trained workforce, we also attract talent from around the world. Within our UC, we have 2 national laboratories, multiple hospitals. So these things are very, very important for helping as we look to the rebuilding effort in the economy. I think the other thing is important to recognize is that because of California's brand and profile, we attract international talent here. We have among the largest number of H-1B visas in the United States. Those folks are here in California, and we are 27% foreign born. 27% of Californians were born outside of the country. That's right, John. And then, like me, half of us have at least one parent who was born outside of the country. That makes us attractive for talent, because we have a society that embraces cultural differences and is very, very open. Another reality of California is that about half of all the VC money, all the venture capital money that's been raised over the last few years, half of that has gone to companies here in California. And a lot of those VCs are here in California finding and looking for those companies and that talent. And that, I hope, is not likely to change either. And I guess the final thing that I would really want to say in this sort of things about California that are really important as a place of innovation that will continue to be attractive is that we have a system of rule of law, we have responsive government, we have the ability to enforce contracts and have an infrastructure that protects companies, protects intellectual property. Now, you can say that about most of the United States, but I think it's really important always to recognize that, because I was a United States ambassador. I served overseas. There were plenty of entrepreneurs who I got to know in Europe who could have started their companies there, but where did they want to go? They wanted to go to California.
I want to go back to some of the people that you mentioned were on the governor's task force. You mentioned a lot of industry CEOs. Do you see a shift, particularly around recent events, with people who perhaps shied away from politics and public service are now kind of rolling up their sleeves and they're looking around and they're thinking, well, I guess it's us now?
I do. And John, I'm so happy that you recognize that too. So I was ambassador in Hungary, in Budapest. Incredible place, incredible tradition of science and innovation, by the way. But when I was there, Viktor Orban had come into power and was systematically weakening democratic institutions and eliminating checks and balances, disparaging and weakening the judiciary system, attacking the free press, coming down on civil society. And at the time that the United States under President Obama was looking to push back and to slow down what was happening there, and influence Hungarians in a way that they would recognize that, look, it's in your best interest to see power dispersed throughout the system, and the people are the protectors of democracy through our advocacy and activism, right? At that time, John, I could never have imagined that these very same pillars of democracy would be under siege in our beautiful country. And yet here we are. So the degree to which people have stood up and understood that as members of civil society, as influential members of civil society, in particular, if they're very successful business people, and the fact that, let's face it, when things go sideways in the world, people come to the United States for refuge. We don't have anywhere to go. We can't all move to New Zealand after all. We have to make sure that there is strength and stability in American democracy for ourselves, our companies, and for our children and for future generations.
Absolutely. I want to shift the topic to another area that's of deep concern, but of deep interest to both of us, which is climate change. I interviewed you for the piece that I wrote for Forbes back in January. And the remarkable thing about California is that it's done what most people said was impossible. It's shown that it can grow the economy and at the same time, it can reduce its emissions. Can you talk a little bit about that? Some of the things that have been successful in California. And if we've got a global audience tuning in today, so if there are people listening in, if there are policymakers from other states or around the world, what do you think is transferable to their economies and policies that can help them do the same?
Well, there is a concern that with the crisis of COVID-19, the ensuing economic crises that we're going to be confronting, that people will back away from action on climate change. And I think that's just a huge mistake. And in California, we recognize that, because the fact of the matter is that if you want to think of it purely in economic terms, we can't afford the destruction that climate change is bringing to us. Here in California, the wildfires have destroyed massive amounts of property and taken many, many lives. We need to continue to keep the issue of confronting climate change at the front of the agenda. It's harder, again, when people perceive more immediate crises at hand, but certainly from the bully pulpit of the subnational level of California, we're going to continue to elevate this issue. We have and will continue to invest in green technology. We will continue to support our University of California system, and as I mentioned, 2 national laboratories that is doing remarkable work when it comes to innovation around carbon capture. We will continue to stand by our 2045 goal of being zero emission, net zero, of having a grid that is a non-carbon grid, 100%. We will continue to stand by these things. And so the private sector knows that getting out there in the green race for these transformative solutions that we really will need, we're under no illusions about that it makes sense, because California is going to continue to stand by our goals, and there will be a market for those technologies in what was going into this crisis, the 5th largest economy in the world, and what we are working hard to make sure will come out of this crisis equally strong or stronger.
I was looking at the recent imports to California, and one of the second biggest import next to cars is oil. And in the county that I live in, Contra Costa County, 30% of our tax revenue comes from oil. And so whilst I try to do things that are good for the environment, I'm at the back of my mind recognizes that we still have such a dependence on petroleum. Today, one of the breakout sessions that we had was on conversion of petrochemical refineries into biochemical refineries that can take in glucose and ag waste and convert them into other things. There's been some other big, bold ideas around helping the oil transition, even nationalizing the oil and paying the companies just to keep it in the ground. Some, big, bold, trillion-dollar problems, but trillion-dollar solutions. But look how much we've just spent on COVID, and climate change is going to make COVID look like this when it comes. Are there any plans in place, or how are you how are you negotiating or dealing with the elephant in the room, which is the oil companies, and so much of our economy is based on petroleum? Can you talk a little bit about what that transition plan looks like to get to climate neutrality by 2045?
Well, I'm always encouraged when I hear executives from the oil industry talking about opportunities in renewable energy as a way to diversify in their companies. It's hard to know how encouraged to be, but you see those glimmers, and I think that's important. But beyond that, they have a market share and a business model that they continue to perpetuate. I think that what we really are going to happen is a change in people's behavior that is also connected to the opportunities to make different choices. So I think we've done a pretty good job in this state of raising awareness of the importance, for instance, of transitioning to zero emission vehicles. But frankly, those options are less available. I mean, look, I'll say this right now, maybe I'm wrong, but I really wanted my kids to I have 2 teenage boys, and I wanted them to get an electric car. They really, really wanted a crossover-y kind of SUV car. The best we could come up with was a hybrid. And okay, it gets 40 miles to the gallon. That's great. But there was no low cost or reasonably cost option for them, like what they got. They got a Toyota. And so, they weren't going to get a brand new Tesla X or whatever those are, the SUVs, because those are a little too pricey for a couple of teenage kids. But we need more options, and we need more investment. And so my hope again is that when you have a commitment like we do in the state of California and our 2045 goals, that will help drive the market. Companies in France just announced that they're going to double down on the production of ZEVs as a way to save their auto industry. That's great news. We need to see more of that coming from Germany. We see a commitment from Japan in terms of their zero emission model, which is more based on the hydrogen model. But it's there. They're investing. They're committed. So again, I think that we've come a long way in terms of public sentiment. We have a long way to go, and suggesting that we have to give this up in order to deal with the more pressing issue of COVID and the economic outfall. I think there's a disconnect there. And so those of us who care about this issue and understand what an existential threat it is to future generations and to our generation, because it's come on even faster than anyone predicted, or not anyone, but the general consensus was that we have to continue to raise our voices.
I want to talk a little bit about transitioning from oil into renewable carbon. So every drop of oil that comes out of the ground is being generally turned into CO2 in the environment. It's heating up the atmosphere. Everything that's produced by biology, that's built with biology, this whole bioeconomy can be built from renewable carbon. The carbon's already in the air, technology to suck it out of the air, turn it into food, turn it into materials, turn it into pharmaceuticals. So there's a great opportunity here for biology, but there's so much sunk infrastructure costs in the petrochemical industry, trillions of dollars globally. It's a juggernaut that's difficult to stop. One of the proposals that we put together in our white paper was a bio-preferred program for the state of California, so that it would be a procurement program where if, let's say, the Department of Education needs to buy carpets, if there's a bio-based polymer out there, like there are in the industry for bio-based nylon versus a petrochemical based, and the price is similar, it would mandate the state of California to purchase the bio-based equivalent. It would provide an anchor customer for the bio-based industry in the state to start people to be able to plan around. are you in favor of policies like that that can kind of use the muscle of the fifth largest economy in the world to nudge the production of bio-based goods and services in the right direction?
Well, yes, and I think a parallel that I would draw on is that the governor signed a bill that requires all new homes constructed in California to have a solar panel. It was interesting because the home construction industry, it wasn't entirely uniform, but some of the large companies, Lennar, for instance, I expected they would balk. It's about a $10,000 per unit cost. And they said, no, because of the rebate programs, that's not going to cost us that much. And our buyers feel good about this. So there are, again, and I think that because we have invested so much around public awareness, we can do more here, and there is support for exactly this kind of thing.
Fantastic. We had the author of a fantastic report by McKinsey on this morning called The Bio Revolution, Michael Chewy, released 2 weeks ago. He showed that 60% of global inputs to manufacturing could be built with biology. And he predicts a bioeconomy of $4 trillion over the next 20 years. So if you haven't seen it, I'd love to send you that report.
Please do.
I want to touch on another topic around the oil companies, because I've actually engaged with the local oil companies to try to understand what are their pain points, where they're trying to make a difference in terms of their sustainability. And one issue came up around being able to produce biofuels from municipal waste, so compost into biofuels. And one of the issues came up was that they thought this was great. They couldn't get permission from the planning authorities to build a new biofuels plant in California, mostly because of the environmental groups have the oil companies in their crosshairs and don't want anything new that the oil companies are building. The only place they could build it, they said, was in Nevada. That suddenly made the cost of then shipping household waste to Nevada, refining it, shipping it back here for fuel, completely impractical. And this brings up a larger topic. We saw Elon Musk really complaining about doing business in California, and this kind of perception that it's difficult to do business in California. As a small digital media company, I don't find it difficult to do business here. But do you think hard tech companies, once they get to big steel in the ground scaling, what is California a difficult place to do business, or maybe you could just touch on that?
Well, the governor had this kind of, I won't say outburst, but he had like a reaction to someone asking a similar question recently. And, I'd never run for public office before, or for elected office before I ran for this job. He's been doing this for a very, very long time. And he said, everybody comes and complains, oh, California, it's not a great place to do business. Why is everybody here? Right? We offer so much. We offer this extraordinary place to live, where executives want to be here. We, going back to all of those things I talked about before, an educated workforce, with higher education opportunities, access to venture capital, all those other things. So I think that it's the responsible thing to do to always answer this question by recognizing that there are a lot of reasons why companies want to be here. Now, in terms of some of the challenges, I think it's important as well that government hear these concerns with humility. It is government's job to be responsive and transparent. And when there are ways that we can be doing things better, we need to do that. So, the Elon Musk example was interesting because, okay, the governor didn't step in and say, counties, you're not going to get to decide anything. I'm going to decide for everybody. He didn't do that. He said, you've got smart people. We've got smart people. We're going to set a floor of operation for the state. If you want to be more or less, or not a floor, a base, I guess, if you want to be more or less restrictive based on the particular realities of your county, you have latitude to do that. And the governor said he would support it. So in the case of Alameda County, they were not quite ready to reopen non-essential manufacturing. Okay, Elon Musk had a tantrum about it, but what happened? What happened was it pushed everybody to get to the table, and Alameda County figured it out quickly, and Elon Musk got back up and running. Now, ideally, you want to be able to get there without the outburst in the middle of it, because it's not particularly helpful for the general impression about how things get done. But when you really look at that case, we got him back up and running, and they're back up and running at Tesla and non-essential manufacturing through most of the state now in a way that as well is safe, which is really what we have to do. If, again, you think of it purely from the economic side, nothing will be worse for our economy than having a surge again in the number of cases.
Agreed. Thank you for that. Last question. We have over 400 entrepreneurs, investors, thought leaders, all wanting to build with biology who are on this at this conference today. Do you have a message for them, and is there anything that we can do to help you?
So I mentioned I have 2 teenage boys, and they just have gone through, they're one's going into senior, one's off to college, and I got to kind of watch them go through chemistry and biology and physics and relive a little bit of my own high school experience. I didn't really take much science in college. By the time I got there, I was moving on to English literature and public policy, but it was so wonderful to watch them and watch them fall in love with science, as well as having all of these incredible new tools. My kids watch YouTubers all the time, and were able, in a way that I wasn't when I was their age, to see experiments on demand on their computers. And I also got to see in this really interesting way, like all the new stuff that happened since I turned, all these changes in what we know in the world, whether it's in biology or physics or computer science, which is a different story. But it excited me kind of vicariously to see my guys have access to what we now know in 2020, and how quickly we're learning more. I mentioned the national laboratories. I was at Lawrence Livermore not too long ago, and they were showing me technology that allowed them to use polymers to scrub a beer brewery in Berkeley to pull the carbon out before it is released into the atmosphere, and how the very polymers that they're sending out to do this job, and I apologize to everyone for my very minimal expertise in this, but that it was also renewable. It's really exciting. And so it's great that you guys are in the in this part of science that gives us so much hope for the ability to inhabit this planet in a way that will be renewable, that will allow future generations to enjoy fresh air and trees, and frankly avoid all of the apocalyptic kinds of science fiction visions that I grew up on, and to make those kinds of, make that kind of a vision for our planet and for our people a reality, and to do it, I hope, always with the idea that there is something sacred about humanity, and not losing the unique way that life on Earth has evolved, but rather to create a reality for the future that will allow it to go on in all of its beauty.
Eleni Kounalakis, Lieutenant Governor of California, climate warrior, builder with biology. Thank you so much for joining us at the Bioeconomy Summit today. Very appreciative of your time.
Great to be with you.
You too.